Visitors are only 110 visitors are allowed per day, and each visitor is restricted to 4 days. So it's a very select group, and even smaller if you aren't Greek Orthodox and male. I hand over to Chris. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Can I have the microphone, please?
Certainly.
I'm doing a bit of everything tonight, so you're going to have to bear with me a little. Now let's see. Camera. This one's supposed to be the audience camera. During the question time, we'll switch back to that one. And right now, I'll go to the speaker camera. Yeah, not a lot of light on the speaker. Talk, I can't hear you.
It's turning the text off.
No, because it's there specifically for accessibility reasons.
Yes.
No, I think they're just going to have to look. Okay. There'll be plenty of photos of me when I get the presentation going. Now, let's see, I'm recording, that's all going. I come in here. And I have to do screen sharing. The band has started. I hope that's the right form of sharing. I want to put this into just the speaker, and for some reason it's showing as Bev, but that's okay. I think the people at the other end can have whatever they want on their screen. Now, I did record all of this, and I could just sit back and click the photos, but someone said, don't be silly, read. Okay, so you'll have to excuse my reading. Mount Athos. It's a 2,000-metre mountain in the southwest of a peninsula in northern eastern Greece. Now, there's a lot of directions there, and I get mixed up between east and west quite a bit during this presentation. I'll try to correct myself. The peninsula is one of 3. So there's the mountain. That's the climb that you do to the top. I haven't been to the top. But the peninsula is one of 3. It's this easternmost one. This whole area is called Chalkidiki. The Western Peninsula, it's all for hedonism. It's a tourist place. People come to it from all over the Balkans. Beach resorts. The central one has got some walking tracks, and some club members have done walks there. I think someone did some walks with a German group at one stage. Yeah. The peninsula itself is mainly agriculture. To put it in context, that's the number 2 city of Greece, Thessalonica. I'll sometimes call it Solun or Salonika. And down at the bottom there is Athens, to put it all in. Turkey's over here. The easternmost one is set aside for religious purposes. In fact, there's a papal bull from about 943 AD that set it aside. And in that papal bull, it says never to be it's prescribed for religious use only, never to be connected to the rest of the world by a path large enough for a cart. In other words, only ever to be connected via footpaths. By the way, Thessalonica needs a couple of days of tourism on your way here. Typically, you would come into Thessalonica. There's an airport there, international airport, and the tourism in Thessalonica is really great. It's an Eastern Roman or Byzantine city. You'll see some photos of the Roman walls and things later on. But while you're there, you can visit the Office of the Holy Mountain. Okay, names. The name of Mount Athos has been... this may be a good time to list the different names for Mount Athos. So in Greek, it's called Agian Oros, which I think means holy mountain, as in saintly mountain. Agia, you know, the saints. You'll see it in many of the churches when they list the saints. So in English, it's often called the Holy Mountain. In the Slavic language, it's called Sveti Gora, which is Holy Mountain. Sometimes it's called the Garden of the Virgin. In about the 10th century, the Eastern Roman Emperor, in a papal bull, set out the law for access, sets it aside for religious communities. Now, I won't talk about, okay, let's go on. Here's some travel advice. I flew into Thessalonica, and I often do, although sometimes I'm visiting relatives in Macedonia, which is about here in Greece, and then just take a bus across to here to Thessalonica. Thessalonica is a good starting point because, among other things, you need a permit to visit Mount Athos. The permit in Greek, I think, is called a dimaterion. I've put a number of them around the room, and we'll talk about them in a second. Now, this says I should show you some photo. Oh, that's the papal bull with some signatures on it and the dates, some old books. Different of the monasteries have different aspects that are regarded as important. Some of them have libraries, 2 or 3 of them have libraries. Here's some tourism in Thessalonica. That's called the White Tower. It's part of an old city wall. So just a town square. This is a photo back looking down to the beach along a city wall. My first visit to Thessalonica was in 1976. We stood down there, and none of these high rises were there. And we could look up and see that down at the sea, we could see that there's this wall. Maybe we should go up and check what was there. It's now, of course, completely built up. If you're interested in the history of Thessalonica, the thing that I think most important is to know that well over 50, maybe 75% of the population was Jewish before the Second World War, all sent off to the death camps. That's a view back down into Thessalonica from the top of the city wall. The city and this wall area, of course, is a UNESCO preserved area. And while you're in Thessalonica, it's worth visiting the Office of the Holy Mountain. That's their rather nondescript offices. Those photos that I took of old papers were in the back. So, travel. You start from Thessalonica, you catch an intercity bus. The intercity buses are called KTEL, K-T-E-L. Oronopoli is a town on the peninsula, and the bus takes you to that town. So there's the intercity bus. Oronopoli is that town here. The border, which blocks this off from the rest of Greece, is this dashed line along there. There's some other interesting things along here. Just here is something called the Canal of Xerxes. When the Persians were fighting the Greeks, Xerxes was one of the leaders, and rather than losing ships, which he did the first time he tried to go by going around the bottom of the peninsula, he just said, right, we'll dig a hole across the canal is pretty much closed up now, but you can see the indentation where the canal was. These asterisks along here are mainly monasteries. A couple of them are things called sketis. I'll talk about them later, on the peninsula. And they're all the religious parts of the peninsula set aside for religious purposes. Typically, you don't access it by car or truck or anything. In fact, you're not even allowed to walk across that border. It's locked off most of the time. You take a ferry from Orinopolis. From Orinopolis, from that small town just at that spot there. I stayed in a hotel there. Actually, I said 3 pilgrimages. Before I did my first pilgrimage, I didn't even trust the information I had about how to get there away. So my very first trip in 2011, a couple of weeks before my pilgrimage, was just take the bus to Orinopolis and the immediate return bus back. So I knew what it is that I was going to and looked around to see hotels and that sort of thing. So I'll talk about prices later on, but bus travel is not expensive in most European cities.
1983, 6 weeks after Diane
Marianne,
Jones'
could you
death,
mute yourself,
a
please?
woman's body is discovered 50 miles from Coggeshall.
Marianne, can you mute yourself, please?
My name's
Thank you, Marianne. So I've done 3 pilgrimages, 2011, 2013, 2015. My first in 2011 was while I was in Europe at a conference. I added some tourism. I accidentally stumbled on Mount Athos in my reading about what I could do while I was visiting Thessalonica. It seemed like an interesting place to visit. So I began to plan my first pilgrimage. As I mentioned, I took a bus ride out there just to see. It's a 3-hour bus ride, so it was 6 hours on the bus. But I think it was worth it, not knowing what I was getting into. New person joining, make sure you mute yourself, please. I had a few spare days before my niece and 2 of her children joined me in Macedonia. It was my job to show them around the ancestral villages. I had another job to get my Greek passport. And for that, I was carrying a whole lot of paperwork, birth certificates, baptismal certificates, etc. So I decided I'd go to Mount Athos. I went to Thessalonica. I found the office of the Holy Mountain. I visited and was told I could apply for a visitor's permit, the Demeterian that you see on the table in front of you. Only 10 permits are issued per day. The waiting time is about 6 months. So I wasn't going to do anything during 2011. I told the very helpful young man in the office there that I was a Christian Orthodox. Now, the language is very important there. If you just say Orthodox, it gets confused with the Jewish Orthodox religion. As far as the Greeks are concerned, there is only one sort of Orthodox, and it's them. And the word Orthodox in other languages, like in the Slavic language, it means the true word. So they call themselves Pravoslava rather than Orthodox, which is truthful word. But in Melbourne, it's called Greek Orthodox. The Greeks didn't like it being called Greek Orthodox. As far as they were concerned, it was Orthodox. And if you need an adjective, put Christian in front of it. So XO is often the abbreviation that they use for themselves to say that you're Christian Orthodox. Anyway, I told the clerk that I was, and because I had my papers for my Greek passport application, I was carrying my baptismal certificate. So I could prove that I was Greek Orthodox, even though I was traveling on an Australian passport. By the way, there's a limit of 100 permits issued to people who are Greek Orthodox. Well, the EU stopped them from using that terminology. They thought that was discrimination based on religion. So the Greeks had a solution to this. They have a solution to many things. They chose to make the rules 100 Greek citizens and 10 others. So that avoids the issue of saying it's a religious discrimination that prevents you from being in that larger pool. By the way, because the 100 permits are very rarely used, I was given a permit a couple of days after I applied, rather than waiting 6 months. But they wouldn't give me my designated permit straight away. I had to get my permit on the designated day of arrival, a day of entry into the Mount Athos, and it would be in a few days' time. The permit, don't worry, it'll be available for you in the office of the Holy Mountain in Orinopoly. So I had to get myself there and trust them that they would have this permit available for me there on the day of travel. That's a bit awkward because they won't give it to you a day early, and the ferry leaves at 6 a.m. The office opens at 5. a.m. Well, how well organised is this? It worked on my first pilgrimage. All I did was test the system. I travelled to Orinopoly, a very small town. I found the local office of the Holy Mountain. I found its open times. I found the ferry port. I slept peacefully, woke, left my bags in the hotel in Orinopoly, and went to get my Dimitirion. The Dimitirion was available for me, so that's very good. It's also called a visa. I'll call it different names. You're too hot. By the way, the ferry did check my permit. So they didn't sell me a ferry ticket until I got on, and then they checked my permit. And if you look at the permits, it's got a day of entry. It's all in Greek, but you can work it out. And it only lasts for 4 days. So you've got a day of designated day to enter. 4 days later, you've got to leave. The ferry stops at a few ports along the way, along the west coast of the peninsula. We got off at a port called Daphne. That's the main entry port. So it stops at some of these monasteries along the way. They've got their own ferry port. And down about here is Daphne, where the main entry is. And from Daphne, I walked to the nearest monastery. I think it's Daphne's there. And I walked up to here, something like that. A very short distance, just a couple of hours. I then caught a bus back to... I climbed a mountain to get to the monastery. There's a bus on the center of the peninsula is a provincial town. This is self-ruling. It's not part of Greece. So the monasteries elect people to be on the council, and the council sits in Piraeus. There's a police station there. There's municipal offices. There's a restaurant. Very little else on the whole island that you would actually pay for. Anyways, I caught the bus back to Daphne from on the side of the road just here and went to the port. There's a main town. I'd mentioned police station, council offices, bus shuttles between Piraeus and Daphne. And although in the 70s, almost everyone travelled by donkey, or actually mule, these days, lots of the monks have got licenses and drive 4-wheel drives. And some of the roads have been improved so that you can actually drive through them. Anyway, I'd pre-booked my ferry from Daphne back to Orinopoly. It was a lucky thing because there was a huge crowd wanting to get on the high-speed ferry because that would get them to Orinopoly early, and then they could have time to make sure that they had a ticket for the bus taking them back to Thessalonica. Transport's not particularly integrated. I had booked the ferry, so that's okay. There was a huge crowd. The rest of them came about an hour later. So mine was a high-speed ferry. It was followed along later by the slow-speed ferry. Now, there must be some photos to show some of these things. There's me at 5 o'clock in the morning trying to get to the ferry. It depends which month you're there. This might have been a photo on a different pilgrimage. So this is the ferry and access to it. By the way, although I was told I'd get my ticket in the office on the day, they said, no, because I went to the office when I got there first and slept the night. They said, no, we will be in a car at the ferry and we'll hand you your Dimitirion there. It's you're in God's hands. That's how I like to put it. So that's a photo of the office. That's a photo of the Demeterion. They're circulating around there. They've got your name, your passport number, and your religion. You can see they're Christian Orthodox, and some dates of arrival and departure. In the city, I said in the central city, I said that there was a restaurant. There's a typical Macedonian, Greek, Balkan dish. Beans, 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 white beans, yes, yes. In Macedonian, it's kafche, which is a pan, grafche, a pan of beans, a little pan of beans. So there's the buses. Now, on the way back, while waiting for the bus, I wanted to take some photos around the town. I hadn't had a chance earlier. So I picked a trustworthy-looking English-speaking man and left my bags with him. And then later on, he left his bags with me. You're dependent on the goodness of strangers, the kindness of strangers, I think is a term that's often used when you're in remote places. This is the bus, the 3-hour bus trip then back to Thessalonica, sitting next to my friend here, my new best friend. His name is Fabio. He's a Genoan. It was Fabio's second visit to Mount Athos. On his first, 20 years earlier, he didn't have a Demeterion, so couldn't get off the ferry. Mind you, the ferryman cheated him, took his fee, took him on the ferry, took him to the port, and then said, no, you can't get off. So this got up his nose, and he was determined to go back and do some successful pilgrimages. And I've done 3 with him, well, 2 with him. I met him on the first. He had 2 main quests that he wanted to complete. The first was to visit all 20 monasteries in the 1 4-day permit. Now, the 4-day permit, of course, people get sick, they get a sore foot. There's a provision to get an extension. And he pushed the limits on the extension. You can get a 2-day extension by going to the police station in Carreras while you're still on the mountain. So really, his aim was to visit the 20 monasteries, sleeping in a number of them, but over a 6-day period. He managed to do it in 2011 when I met him, but he failed to climb to the top of the mountain. The weather got him and snow at the top, and it just wasn't suitable for climbing. So he had more trips that he needed to do because he was still determined. He has these 2 quests. My second pilgrimage was we arranged to go together on his next one. His next one was in 2013. Fabio and I had made a pact to return in 2013 and do our 2 quests. I joined him in his quest. I had pre-arranged my visa because now I knew all the rules, and by now I knew the contact details for the clerks, etc. So I could arrange all of that in Melbourne by email before I got there. It wasn't waiting for me in Thessalonica. Still, I had to pick it up in Oronopoli, but at least I didn't have to visit the office in Oronopoli to prove who I was. They had records good enough to indicate my previous visit. So I joined Fabio at the KTEL office in Thessalonica. We took the 3-hour ride into Thessalonica, into Oronopoli, checked out the land border. I hadn't been to the land border before. I knew that it was closed. Here's some monasteries, just to give you a view. They're a bit out of order because what we did on our 2013 visit is just check out the land border. Not a particularly strong border. You wouldn't hold much back, would it? It's no, it's not a Trump wall. But it did have rather a strict warning. I didn't see anybody patrolling the border. Right, there's a fence. Again, 6 a.m. ferry to the southwesternmost port on the peninsula. Ah, yes, this time we didn't stop at the ferries along the way. We went right down to the bottom edge. This is the view halfway up from the sea to the little church and chapel here. To give you an idea of the steepness, it's a zigzag climb up there. So this is called Agia Anna, Saint Anne. And we started our climb from there. Let me just tell you that trying to climb, and I've got some photos of our trip on that trip. Where was that? Oh, that was the very first photo, wasn't it? So we started at the ferry port at the bottom at sea level. We went up to about 700 meters where there was a little chapel. You saw that in the photo there above my head in that next photo. We then walked around to this spot here, which is called the Crossroads, Stavros in Greek. And then from Stavros, we climbed. We went up and up and up, stopped at a little chapel at 1,500 meters. Now, this is 1,500 meter climb in one day is pretty heavy, but there's some up and down along the way. You know, this isn't flat. These paths aren't flat. So by the time we got to, this is called Panagia, one of the names for Mary. And it's a little church there, nice cold water, nice shelter. I stopped, drank too much and couldn't go on. Fabio was determined to get to the top. He didn't drink too much and he took off from here to climb up the rest of the mountain there. That's another 500 meters. So off he goes. He took 2 hours. He returned having gotten himself lost. He decided it was starting to get late, that 2 hours of trying to find the path up here. You notice this is the tree line, so that's about 1,000 meters. No trees grow above it, no shelter. So he failed in his quest number 1 on this trip. He was disappointed. I was disappointed, but we didn't die. We climbed back down and then went around here to a spot at about 600 meters altitude. And there's a sketi. A sketi is another name for a farm or an outpost from the monastery. There's usually 2 or 3 monks there. They're willing to greet you, but they're not set up for large numbers of people to sleep over, etc. But they do their best. They share what they've got because they're monks. As far as the second of my quests, visiting 20 of the monasteries, we visited many, not all 20, but plenty. And I'll show you some of the monasteries we visited in a second. My third pilgrimage was in 2015. In Australia, I boasted about my plans to friends, told them how hard it was, but I was determined to make it this time. I put in the hours training so that I could succeed in the climb. A cousin and a friend, Jim and Nick, said, anything Chris can do, we can do too. So they came along with me. They didn't spend 4 months doing the 1,000-step walk. I got to the stage where I could go out to the 1,000-step walk and do 4 laps up and down, up and down, up and down over 4 hours. So that's the sort of ability to climb that you need. And even that's not the full 1,000, 2,000 meters. That's sort of about 1,000 meters of climbing. I think it's 400 meters for each lap at the 1,000 steps. So 4 4s are 16. So that should get you to Panagia. But my friends hadn't done that. I did test them out before going, and they could actually climb up and down once. I also practiced making sure I carried packs. So I took 10 kilograms, maybe a bit more with me. So this time there were going to be 4 of us. Fabio joined us, Jim, Nick, and me. Jim and Nick only had one mission. They were going to climb Mount Athos. Fabio still had his 2 objectives. Cutting a long story short, the attempted climb succeeded. Fabio and Jim, even though Jim hadn't done the training, managed to get to the top. Nick was not able to proceed past the crossroad. So we did all of this to here. We went and stayed in the sketty thinking, now we're not going to start from sea level. We're going to do the climb from about 600 meters. So that took a bit of height off. The trouble is, Nick, when we'd got to the crossroad, realized he wasn't going to make it. That 200-meter climb from the sketty to the crossroad was enough to tell him he wasn't going to make it for the next 1,000 meters to the top. So I couldn't leave him. I couldn't say to him, just take this road 20 kilometers or so and you'll get to a monastery. He'd never been to this place before. So I pulled out at this stage as well. I feigned tiredness so that he wouldn't feel too bad. And I went off with him. So on this day, Nick and I did a 25-kilometer hike and about 1,000 meters of net climb over the 25 kilometers. And we got to a good shelter, a monastery that had beds for us and food, etc., rather than just a couple of monks who gave you the crumbs because they had nothing much more than crumbs. Meanwhile, Fabio and Jim made it to the top of the mountain and down. They were hoping to stay at Panagia, which is this little church here, but there was work happening at the top of Mount Athos. It's been 1,000 years and nobody's bothered, and everyone's tried to climb it, and nobody's bothered to put any sort of shelter at the very top. There's no toilets up there. There's no garbage collection facilities up there. So while Nick and Jim were doing this climb, it was during a 6-month period that some builders were building a shelter at the top of the mountain, and they were being accommodated in this little church on the way up. Let's see if I can find some photos of that. I didn't get photos of that climb, but Nick and Jim certainly did, and I got a copy of their photos. There we are. This is our arrival in 2015. Happy foursome at the beginning, before the struggles. This is what you get at a typical stop at a monastery. Coffee, some cold water, some rakia, grappa for those of you who don't know what the rakia is, and something sweet, often a lokum, a Turkish delight. This is the quality of the tracks, a lot of the tracks, not all of them. They're designed so that a mule can make it. And there's mule trains. So this is on our arrival. So this is during our ascent. Fabio decided he would ride on the mules. Our bags were being taken by mules, so we didn't have to carry everything up to the sketty where we spent our first night before the climb. But the mules didn't take us all the way up. There's a typical sign. Can you read Greek? You need your mathematics training. Pi, alpha, nu, alpha, gamma, India, alpha. Pronounced Panagia. That's the little chapel and church. So you got to know at least that much Greek to get around. Most of the signs are in Greek, mind you. Oh, yes. That's not yards. So here's some more signs. This is very close to the crossroads. When Fabio and I did this, we just left our bags up in trees to stop wolves and bears from getting them. Not that we saw any bears, but we just thought it was safer rather than leaving them at ground level. So this is the 2015 trip. So this is the Church of Saint Anne is in that direction. And the IM, I think that means Holy Monastery. Oh, I don't even know what I won't bother reading that because I'm not sure. I'll just make a mistake. Now, this is the mule train. There's the little church. So this mule train was on its way to the top of the mountain. They got to feed the mules while they're there, and they're carrying construction goods for their work up there. Most of the labourers seem to have been Albanian, from what I saw. There's Panagia, the little chapel that sucked me into drinking too much water and I got stuck at. Here's the mules coming in. There's the top of Mount Athos, Jim, and there's Jim celebrating having made it to the top and come back down, I think. There he is. That was always there, but this new building is what the construction people were doing. So it's this is in the church. There's a bedroom space, and this was full up, all booked with the construction workers. So there was no room for Jim and Nick to stay, which meant they had to climb all the way up and then come back down. They had a long day. I'll tell you about their day in a second. Their day was 35 kilometres and a total ascent, well, it was the 2000, a total ascent back to sea level where the monastery is, where we ended up, of about 3,000 metres. They did a great job. And back to sea level where they met us and had some accommodations. Only just made it in, 8 p.m. It was about 14 hours of trekking for them. By day 3, we'd finished with the monastery that we visited called the Magistis Lavra, the Great Lavra. I'm not sure what Lavra stands for. That's the Russian monastery. By the way, these views you can get from a ferry. You're not going to like this. Women aren't allowed on Mount Athos, but typically they would take a ferry around the outside of the peninsula. So they get quite close and they get views of the monasteries, which are mainly clustered around the sea edge. The agriculture is interesting. This place has been occupied for well over 1,000 years. So there's lots of terraces and the monks make everything themselves. Not having women or female creatures there is a bit of a handicap. They can't have eggs. They can't have cow's milk. They can have, they can't breed goats even, but they can buy these quantities in and they trade. They make their own wine and they sell produce. This is a typical monastery. They have balconies overlooking the sea. This one here is a rather famous one. It's called Simonos Petrus, Simon my Rock, or Simon the Rock. That's another one down there. That's a Docorio, I think. You're called to lunch and you're woken up with a bell. The bell isn't metal. The bell is a wooden log, and they beat it with a wooden hammer. So you see those everywhere. There's Simonos Petrus as well. That balcony that I was on was up here. This is Nick and I making our way to Magistis Lavra, where they've got an ossuary, if you know what that is, a helipad. Here's one of my favourite photos. It shows medieval crenellated things to prevent the pirates from getting into the monastery, a helipad, and one of the photos has some dung from a donkey, no, from a mule. So this is the typical accommodation in the monastery we had that night, 4 of us in that room. You're not allowed to take photos of the monks. You're not allowed to take photos in the churches. I snuck some. You're not allowed to take photos of the food. I snuck some. So there we are in Keries. We went over to that monastery. Then we took a bus back into this provincial town because the Magistislava is one of the major monasteries, so there's buses to and from the town centre, the provincial centre. And here, two of us got our extensions for our Dimitrions. And then we went back out to the west coast. No female creatures on Mount Athos. So I don't know how that snake was bred. No snakes on Mount Athos. I got a photo of a snake on Mount Athos. By the way, they allow female cats. They like cats because cats keep the rodents down. This is the inside of the Russian monastery. I think this might be my bed here. You can imagine what it's like sleeping in here with 20 rather old, snory men, but we survived. At the end of our walk up the west coast, visiting a number of monasteries as we went, we didn't sleep there. We were planning to come back to Daphne. This is us in Daphne, and it was raining. In fact, it rained on our way back into Daphne. By this stage, Nick and Jim were very pleased with this rain to go back to Oronopoli. In fact, we thought maybe if it's going to rain for the next 2 days, we should go back into Oronopoli as well. So we all took the ferry in. Here we are at the end of it now must be about 4 days. That's Nick. He bought himself a stick. He didn't have walking poles. He was very happy to have that pole. In fact, you can't see the photo. I'm sorry. Someone's going to yell at me in a minute because of the captions, but it says Athos on it. That's Jim. Now, the beards, well, when we got back into Oronopoli, civilization, they cheered themselves for having survived. We were going back. They had a swimming pool. They had a nice hotel to wait for us. And we had a meal before we went back to Daphne. And this time, having gone to Daphne, we took the bus up to Keres and we started traveling, visiting the monasteries along the east coast. So they're beautifully laid out. I think the seas are much worse along here. They weren't so worried about pirates. So these monasteries tend to be a little bit smaller than the others. Here's a typical sign telling you about Pantokratos, Holy Monastery Pantokratos, Holy Monastery Vatopedi, Holy Monastery Hilendaro. That's the only one I haven't visited so far. That's the Serbian monastery. And Holy Monastery Svigomenu. Fabio knows a monk that he met in the 70s when he visited 20 years previously. And in fact, a Latin-speaking or Italian-speaking monk, so he was very pleased to catch up with him again. And there we are, traveling from one monastery to the next on typical roads. But the rain did come back. We just thought, well, we can put up with it. So we did on one day. Oh, no, not all the signs are in good condition. If you look very carefully, you'll see that's a B, which is V for Vato, Vatopedi or something like that. So that's Vatopedi, one of the major monasteries. That's a sketi. A sketi is supposed to be a small farm where some rebel monks go out to hide from the main monastery because they don't want the discipline of the main monastery. This one's rather larger. It's actually Romanian. So it's Romanian Orthodox. And it's I think it's Elijah it's named after. So this is the rainy day traveling along the east coast. This is my about day 5, 6 now. So you notice I've tried to grow my beard to show you what it was like in person, but I didn't manage to do it for 4 days. Pantokrato, Holy Monastery Pantokrato, Holy Monastery Vatopedi. My sister loves Vatopedi. Some of the icons there are supposed to bring and help births. If your sister, your wife, your mother is having difficulty having more children, then you go along and you pray at the icon in Vatopedi specifically for that. The various monasteries have various specialties. Yes. Now you can go and pray. Of course. Yeah.
Can't pray for herself.
Well, you can pray for yourself as well. She can't pray for herself, unfortunately. So there we are. Not all the roads are bad. So there's a typical entrance to a monastery. That's the I think the Russian monastery had a very nice bathrooms. There's the beds are a bit better quality. Here we are, day one. We landed at Daphne. We landed at that monastery there, visited it, visited the guest house, took a walk down to about here, visited the monasteries on the way, then a walk down to about here. The walking path was a bit up and down, so we took a ferry that was available to us to get to here, and that was day two. We haven't stayed. Did we stay at one? Yes, we stayed at this one here. So we arrived at the guest house. We were welcomed with the drinks. We showed our Dimitrion. They said, yes, you can stay, guys. I'm starting to run out of time. And they'll offer you a bed if they've got it, and breakfast in the morning. So this is day three. As I said, this is the climb. So we started at the Sketty at 600 meters. We went up to the crossroad at 800 meters. The climbers went up to the top and came back down again. Meanwhile, no, so that's the climbing team up to the top and down again. Was that me, the non-climber? No, that was the climber day three. And then they finished off their walk over here. That's the great Lavra, Magistis Lavra. Meanwhile, we just took off from the Sketty, went up to the crossroads, said, that's enough for us. We're bailing. And so we just did that 25-kilometre hike to Magistis Lavra there. We got there in good time, 1 p.m., something like that. The boys who did the climb, on the other hand, they weren't there till 8 p.m. and the doors closed at 8. So they only just made it in time. Otherwise, they would have had to have slept in that portico there in sleeping bags. There's a portico outside the main door. The next day, we took a bus. We visited a cave here where Saint Athanasios spent a large part of his time as a hermit. Then the bus took us to this monastery and stopped, and we visited. Then we went to Keries. We got our extension for the extra 2 days, and then took the bus down to the Daphne. And then we had some spare time before the ferry back to Oronopoli. So all four of us did a couple of walks up there and back down again, and then into Oronopoli. So that was day 4. For Fabio and me, after sleeping one night in Oronopoli, we immediately came back to Daphne, did this walk again, and then went into Keries, and then did walking up this coast there. Like that. Went into Keries by bus, and then visited these monasteries up the east coast, the Turkish coast. Disgusting. Because of the sea and the way it goes, a lot of these on the sea, the beaches, covered in litter. Mediterranean litter all collects on those beaches. It was nasty. Anyway, then we took a ferry home after visiting those three, and the ferry took us to Kilandaro, but we didn't get off and visit the Kilandaro monastery. This monastery is Serbian. This monastery is, it's called Zografu. It's Bulgarian. I have visited now all but Kilandaro. I visited Vatopedi on my 2013 trip. Then we took a high-speed ferry around to here, and then took a bus back to Oronopoli, met our mates, and took ourselves into, they're the ferry trips that we took out, and that's a short ferry trip. So there's the whole peninsula. I've slept at the monasteries marked in a red circle, a black circle, and we've just visited the others. So let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 over here that you can't see. I better turn that off. Well, never mind. 13, 14, 15. I don't know where the missing ones are. Trust me, I've been to 18. Now, food. The food is free. You can't pay. The beds are free. But you get what you get. You're not supposed to take photos in the dining room. I did take photos in the dining room. Oh, I've got a section about costs. So the bus is typically 10 euros. A ferry was 6 euros. The Dimitirion was about 10 euros. Food in the monastery, 2 meals a day free. Hot water, nothing. No hot water. That's why we ended up with beards. Beds in the monasteries are free. Hotel beds in most of the towns that we were in were about 100, 120 euro. Money has no particular meaning on Mount Athos, although they do have gift shops. So you can buy stuff. And on the 2015 visits, they had FPOS in the gift shops. Now, you'd feel after getting all this hospitality for a week or so, you'd want to give someone some money, you know. The monks are rather poor. You're not allowed to. One monk is designated as the guest house monk. He welcomes you into the monastery. He gives you that welcoming sustenance. He tells you about the food and the bedding arrangements, tells you whether you have to go on. If there's no bed for you there, he'll tell you the quickest way to the next monastery where there might be beds. Another monk is called the donations monk or the gifting monk. And he's the only one who's allowed to receive donations to the monastery. These are beautiful. The dining room is called the trapeza. Trapeza is also a table. And so this is the trapeza of Vatopedi, beautiful rock, carved rocks, and designed so that pilgrims, grotty bastards, grotty things that they are, can be washed down. So all the silverware gets lifted off and they can splash water on these stone tables, stone seating around the outside. There, see stone seating here, for sitting at that table. So it's designed for large numbers of very tired people to go to it. And the monks are very hospitable. Like the dining room monks, as part of their penance, I think, their commitment to society, apart from chanting and whatnot that they do the work. So they collect the things. They bring you the food, they take the plates away, they wash the plates, they do all the cooking, etc. There's no even opportunity for help. In the guest, huh? Yeah, yeah. The Russian one is the only one that was different. The Russian one in the guest house, when we left our cups and saucers on the table, as we'd been trained to do at all the other guest houses, asked us what sort of people we thought we were leaving a mess on the table. So we had to take them to the counter where the monk was. We didn't know the rules. So there's another typical trapeza, the meal. Bread, something vegetarian, a bit of fruit, whatever they've got. No meat. These are the very poor monks in the Sketi, the first one. They live on what fish they can catch out of the sea. And the meals that they gave us were just greens that they grow and some pasta. So there's a word that you need to know if you go to Mount Athos. Pros, which is towards. Arkontariki. So that's a rose, that letter, not a P. Arkontariki. And the Arkontariki is, in English, the guest house. And the Arkontariki monk is the one who greets you at the guest house. So you look out for that sign. The other thing to watch out for, in each of the monasteries, this is the inside of the guest house. There's a logbook. Details are recorded in there. There's the typical provisions that are provided to you. It's best to travel with someone who doesn't drink alcohol. Fabio doesn't drink alcohol, so we had to share his rakia. These little glasses are a grappa, beautiful cold water, and locally made sweets of one sort or another. This is another one of the guest houses in one of the more busy monasteries, Vatopedi. Here's a list of the monasteries and what they're specially known for. Let's see what it says about Vatopedi. Now, Vatopedi, known for its extensive library and significant collection of Byzantine manuscripts. No mention of the icon. There's an area, I didn't have a drone. It's an aerial view of Simonos Petrus. one of the most spectacular of the monasteries. And for those of you who've been to Greece and the monasteries there, they like to be built on a cliff. So this is sort of a cliff type arrangement. That's the Elias Sketi. That's the monasteries that I told you about earlier. That's another view of, oh, maybe that's Simonas Petrus on the top of the rock. I'll tell you an interesting story about going to this one. No, I won't. I'm out of time. What I can tell you about is time. Time is very important that you understand time on Mount Athos. The monks and the ferries that leave Mount Athos, their leaving times are designated in Athos time. Not Greek time, not Greenwich Mean Time, Athos time. Athos time is also known as Byzantine time. And Byzantine time sets the clock to 0 hours at sunset. So you set the clock at 0 hours at sunset. When we were there on one of those trips, it was about 8 p.m. So at 8 p.m, they lock the gates and set the clocks to 0. Then at 8 o'clock, which is now 12 hours later, is the first meal. Actually, the first meal you'd have is, because you're a guest, would be at 8 p.m. that night when you get there. Then the first meal of the day, breakfast, is at 8 a.m. the next, which is 12 hours later. So 2 meals a day is what the monks live on. Yeah.
Yeah. 9 years later, you're saying, and you kind of, when we go there, but I've got a feeling that the majority of us here can't go there.
That's right. But there's a few who can. I could have chosen not to talk about Mount Athos, but then, yeah. Look, there are other monasteries. There are nunneries in some monasteries, but they're just not at Mount Athos. And a lot of the traditions
Is female free.
the right-hand peninsula, yes, the whole lot of it is female free. Yeah, to the point where they don't even have horses. They don't even have animals that would require to be bred. They have mules, and they bring the mules in, and mules, of course, aren't male or female. Well, it's interesting you should say that, but their rules are very strict about not tempting the monks. My friend Fabio, who's Italian, likes to wear his T-shirt, and he was looked at very, that's not what you're supposed to do, mate. There's no swimming because you're not allowed to go in bathers and go in the beach.
Monks, when the monks go there, do they stay there like for the rest of the natural life?
It's interesting. If you're a parish priest in the Orthodox religion and you become widowed, you're not supposed to remain as a parish priest, because parish priests must be married. The exact opposite. The exact opposite of the Catholic religion. Now, there are some Eastern Catholic parishes, and even some in Italy, but they're ones that were in Byzantium and then came across 1,000 years ago and have just been living quietly in hidden ways.
So
So a typical priest, when he becomes widowed, would choose to go and spend a monastic life there. The other people who are monks for their whole life are people who aim to end up being bishops. The upper echelons of the Orthodox Church are celibate. And so they start out as monks. They spend a lot of time in these places studying theology, and then come back and become the bishop of one of the larger cities or a smaller town, but not parish priests. So the monks, people will go here for, I did say something about that, who goes there. So I talked about Athos time, 12 hours. Tradition, the tradition is that the Virgin Mary and John the Baptist took shelter on Mount Athos, shelter from a storm. Hence, it's been reserved ever since and known as the Garden of the Virgin. So you see, they're not sexist. They're just reserving it for her. This is also sometimes used as the excuse for not allowing other women or anything else. If you look on the internet, you'll find women on Mount Athos. There's been a couple of instances. The Kilandaro, for instance, when there was a very bad plague in the capital of the Kingdom of Serbia in about 1100, 1200, the Queen actually came, brought money and stayed at Kilandaro until the plague dissipated in her town, and then she left. There's a couple of people who've snuck in, and they've written books about their sneaking in. And there's stories about at one stage, some people were shepherds on Mount Athos, and the daughters of the shepherds would carry milk into the monasteries and would act as servants in the monasteries. But it's very strict at the moment. I didn't see any women. Some miscellanea about Mount Athos. I'm a member of a group called the Friends of Mount Athos. So you can throw stones for another reason. King Charles is the royal patron of the Friends of Mount Athos, and he has been since he was Prince Charles. Visitors are restricted to those invited. So if you're invited by a monk, your own priest would write to a monk that he knows and would say, invite some person along, and the period of invitation is given to them. So they're not included in the 110. A huge land scandal. In fact, some of these monasteries, I'm talking about them being poor. Some of them are extremely rich. Let me tell you the story I heard at Vatopedi, the Bulgarian monastery. In the previous 20 years, the monastery had, when it was still communist Bulgaria, they discouraged religion. The monastery was down to 2 or so monks. The Greek governments, or the Greek people in the Greek monastery said, well, look, you can't run this huge monastery with just the 2 of you. We'll take it over. Well, the Bulgarian government didn't like that, because that monastery, the single largest foreign capital inflow to Bulgaria, was from the lands that the Bulgarian monastery owns in Thessalonica. You'll see a suburb when you're in Thessalonica called Zographou, and all of those buildings there belong to the Zographou monastery in Mount Athos. So the Bulgarian government very quickly sent 200 very dedicated Christians to be monks at Vatopedi to make sure that they didn't lose access to that wealth. And what Robin's talking about, people over the 1,000 years have left lands right through Greece. And then there's scandals about exchanging lands here to lands there. 180 million euro that went to one of the monasteries. Yes.
State grabbed all this land, and then so the church said, well, we want to compensate for that, and they did a land swap.
Right. Yep. Yep. Yeah. So that's one scandal. Yes. Well, religion's religion, and they've managed to survive for 1,000 years. So they might claim, like the Catholic Church does with the lands that it has around Australia since settlement, they bought it cheap when there was no one here, and they still sit on it. You see these beautiful bits of land around the place. So donations over the millennia have gone here. And it's never been confiscated back, like in England with the dissolution of the monasteries. They confiscated a lot of the similar sorts of things that were happening around England then. The Friends of Mount Athos do good. They're not just like me, poddling around. These footpaths need repair. The monasteries are disintegrating. They need repair, so they collect money. They send people to work. Every year they send about 20 people to stay for about 10 days, path cleaning, and the monasteries choose which paths to clean. They run conferences. They do research in the libraries. I talked about my training for the pilgrimage. Food in the monasteries, no eggs, no something or other. Moving around quite, yes. There is a thing called the Great Silence, which happens at about 10 p.m. and lights out. and you're not allowed to talk to anybody during that time until roughly 3 a.m. when the church service starts, getting you ready for the meal. Church services aren't compulsory. I did attend one and did some recordings, which I haven't got time to show you today. Beautiful singing, of course, the choirs. There you go. Miscellaneous. Every monastery has a guest house. I talked about that. You're not allowed to give money. I talked about that. And we have managed to talk about no women being allowed. There you go. By the way, who was Athos? Yes. How many monks? Okay. So it varies. A typical monastery would have 20. Some of the bigger ones would have 200. Sometimes there's the Russian one, when it was doing its celebration of 1,000 years at Mount Athos, I think they had about 1,000 people staying at it. Not all of them were monks. A lot of them were pilgrims. Not all, look, I'm a pilgrim as in I wanted to walk in pristine territory, nature. Some of the pilgrims are there for religious purposes. You know, some of them are broken souls looking for consolation of various sorts. And I did see them there at the time. Yes. There's a Greek, yeah. So there you go. What else can I say? I'm happy to take questions. If you unmute yourself at the remote end, we can hear you.
So Chris, with the ferries and buses and things like that, how good is the information?
Ben, I can't hear you. Why not? Oh, sorry, the speaker turns itself off. Someone noticed that Beth hadn't muted herself because my speaker had turned itself off. Right, Ben, I think we should be able to hear you now.
My question is, in relation to the buses and the ferries, how accessible is the information about them?
What did you ask?
Is there good information about the buses and ferries?
It was good information. Yeah.
It's easy to obtain.
It's all on the internet, quite well laid out. The Friends of Mount Athos have a little booklet. I brought some booklets in here. You know, what you can do to go there. There's web pages that the Friends of Mount Athos have written as well. There's lists of phone numbers for the monastery so that you can make pre-arrangements, rather than we turned up at the Russian one and they said, we don't take guests who just turn up. It was empty. You saw that room. There was hardly anyone in that 20-person room, but they don't take guests who just turned up. You've got to book in. They've got the rule. What do we do? Well, walk up north to another monastery, spend the night there. While you're there, ring us and book in. From outside, I had to ring and book in. Anyway, I did that. Yeah, you can unmute yourself, everybody. You know, I can't unmute you. I can mute you, but I can't unmute you, because I want to hear you clapping.
I really enjoyed it, Chris. Thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Good, Bernadette.
Okay, is there anybody else on Zoom that has got a question?
Yes, I enjoyed it too. Thank you.
Beth. I'm sure everyone did, because you're still here. And Bruce didn't turn up.
Who didn't turn up?
Bruce.
Oh.
Bruce and Deb and I were at university together, so we've been friends for 40 years or so. And he would have been red-faced through all of this. He hates talkback.
Okay, is there anybody in the room got a question?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris.